And Ron Johnson has a career ACU rating of 98%. In our books, that's pretty much... that's sterling silver, that's gold, that's platinum. We're talking to two real conservative leaders, not in just how they vote, but also thinkers who approach the question of immigration and really all questions from their practical experience in life. Congressman Labrador is a lawyer and someone who really understands getting the law right. And Ron Johnson is someone who understands how important it is that markets work and that entrepreneurs can survive in these markets. So I guess I'll tip this off by saying thank you for being here, of course, but both as conservative Republicans. First, I'll start with you, Senator Johnson. How do the politics of immigration work in your state of Wisconsin? Give us an idea of what you hear back home.
Well, it's interesting. I've never been involved in politics. I started running for the U.S. Senate, and you start traveling all over the place, and probably the first really instruction I got from Citizens Wisconsin were dairy farmers, and they said, we need migrant workers to milk our cows. It's an incredibly important issue. And so, certainly I understand that if you want to build an economy, there's two components to economic growth. It's human capital combined with financial capital. And we need to make sure that we have adequate human capital to do the things we need to do. And right now, I think we've got a real problem. We're not recognizing reality. There's way too much demagoguery in this issue. So, certainly how I'm trying to use my committee is holding hearings, laying out the components of, all the problems in border security, and they are significant, and it is complex. But as I've told my staff, the goal of every hearing is to make sure that all the people on the dais, the people watching, take the first step in solving any problem, which is admit you have one. And the way you get people to admit they have a problem is lay out that reality. So that's what we're trying to do.
So with your business experience and what I've heard you say there, do you look at this issue first for how, in the way it impacts business people in your state? Is that the kind of the entry-level way you look at it?
I think I look at it as how it affects America and our entire population in terms of how do we grow our economy, how do we recognize realities. And we've got to frame it from that standpoint as
right.
What are we going to do to get the kind of economic growth to provide the prosperity and the type of opportunities that Americans are expecting.
Congressman, the moderator, my job is to make myself insignificant to this conversation, so feel free to jump in. But from your point of view, we've watched Congress wrestle with immigration laws in the past. There's the big compromise that passed in 1986, and then a ton of little fixes. You're someone who understands getting the law right. Why do we not seem to get it right?
Well, because we're looking at this issue just as a political issue and not as a policy issue. I was an immigration lawyer for 15 years, so I know a little bit about this issue, and I dealt with it on the ground as a practitioner. And what I noticed for the most part is that my entire practice, the whole 15 years that I was practicing as a lawyer, I was still dealing with cases that came from the 1986 law. So you have to realize I graduated from high school in 1985, and as a practicing lawyer, I was, for the entire 15-year career, I was dealing with the repercussions and the ramifications of the 1986 law because they didn't get it right. They didn't get it right from the beginning. If you remember, Ronald Reagan went ahead and approved the compromise on immigration reform because he was promised two things. He was promised that there would be border security and there would be a guest worker system that works. He didn't get either one of those things. And frankly, because you had the big businesses and big labor come to him and tell him, and subsequent presidents, they didn't want to comply with the law. Big business and the chamber and other groups came to him and said, these fines are too much and they're really affecting our businesses too much, so we need to stop with the fines. And then big labor came in and said, we don't really want a guest worker program that works because that diminishes the power of the unions. So you had big business and big labor getting together, and that's why we've had for 30 years a system that is not working, a system that is really meant for the 1950s, and now we're in the 21st century and we haven't been able to modernize the immigration system. So we need to do certain things, and we need to make sure that those promises that were made to President Reagan in 1986, that we can comply with those promises, that we can actually follow those promises. That's why the first thing we need to do is make sure that we enforce the laws that are in the books. We need to make sure that we have a system of border security and interior security that can protect the American people, because I agree with Ron, with Senator Johnson. The reason we should do immigration reform is so we can protect the American people, so we can protect every one of our constituents. It's not for political promise, it's not for political power, it's so we can have a system that comports within our free market economy. We can't make favorites, and we can't have government giving favors to other people. We need to make sure that it's a system that in this 21st century we're going to be able to fix. And I think there's a way to do it. You can do it in a step-by-step approach. I've seen too many Republicans, unfortunately, thinking that this is the way to gain electoral votes in 2018 or in presidential elections. What they're going to learn is that if they do this for political reasons, they're going to end up losing the political process, because the other side is always going to be able to make more promises than we are. And that's why we lose. If we just start offering a little bit less or a little bit more, if we make it all about politics, we lose. If we make it about policy, we can fix this system and the American people will get behind it.
Let me quick hop in here so we don't lose the moment. One of the things I've done in hearing after hearing is I just lay out a timeline of here's the laws we've passed, immigration reform, border security, and then right next to the law, I say how many people are in this country illegally. It started about 3.9 million in 86, dropped down to 3.5, but then we keep passing laws. It goes to 6 million, to 9 million, to 11 million, to 12. Obviously we haven't fixed the problem. Mm-hmm. And another little insight too is, you remember how Leader McConnell and Leader Boehner, really begged the president, don't act unilaterally, give us a chance. Well, after the election, when I knew I'd become chairman of Homeland Security, I was very open from a standpoint of my top priority is we have to secure the border, but I'd always throw a little wrinkle in that, a little unusual element of securing the border, which would be a functioning guest worker program. I mean, if you really think about what's the number one thing we have to do to secure the border is how about we eliminate or drastically reduce the incentives for illegal immigration. What's the number one incentive for illegal immigration? It's people coming here to work. Of the 11, 12 million people in this country illegally, 8.1 million are working. Let's make that a legal process. If we do that, it takes a whole lot of pressure off the border, and it will be easier to try and provide greater border security. So again, to me, that makes perfect sense. Now, I was actually working with Raul, making some progress. I'm not going to name names, but people that you'd be a little surprised about were somewhat receptive to that.
Oh, come on, name names.
The minute President Obama acted unilaterally, those conversations ended. Can't do that, just secure the border. And that is a real shame, because if you're really going to secure the border, we need to eliminate those incentives.
With your chairmanship of Homeland Security, do you feel like you know what the population that's here illegally, do you know the number? And if we don't know the number, because it seems like the press always quotes a different number, does that get to the question is we don't even know what the problem is, and so it's hard to figure out how to solve it?
No, the information, the data we need is extremely difficult to get a hold of. I mean, how insecure is our border? DHS says we apprehend about 75%. Border Patrol agents say it's about 30 to 40, and they talk about how subtle intimidation distorts those figures. But you really want to know how unsecure our border is, take a look at our drug enforcement. We had General McCaffrey testify before our committee and said that we're only interdicting between 5 and 10% of illegal drugs coming in here. So let's face it, if we can't stop drug trafficking, that just shows you how really, our border is not secure, bottom line.
So and we don't know the number, but what we know is that when Reagan did the amnesty in 1986, the number was estimated to be 1 million, and it ended up being 3.6, 3.7 million. So whatever the number is, we're not accurate about it. But the issue is, I take issue with people who say that the problem is the 12 million people that are here. That's a symptom of the problem. The problem is that we have an immigration system that is not modernized for the 21st century. Once we fix the immigration system, it doesn't matter what the number is. We're going to be able to solve that. And the most important thing, we're going to prevent people from coming in. Because if you have a guest worker program that works, and you have enforcement mechanisms where employers know if they hire an illegal alien that they're going to be penalized and it's going to be a major fine, they're going to stop employing people that are here.
I have found that with conservative voters and conservative populations, the easiest argument to make is, believe it or not, government is getting immigration wrong.
Yes.
They actually believe that. They know that it needs to be modernized, to use your word. But let me ask you a question. You've both been in Congress the same amount of time. You've seen the philosophy of let's make it big and comprehensive on a big issue that the nation faces, and then you've seen that fail on big important things, and you said, well, maybe we need to start by just taking one step in the right direction. Congressman, when you look at this question of immigration, how do we go forward from here?
You have to do it on a step-by-step approach. And sadly, it's been the Democrats, and specifically this president, who has gotten in the way. I'll give you a simple example. I proposed to the Democrats a couple of years ago, there's a simple fix in the law. The law right now says that if you're here illegally, but you can become legal, you have to go back to your home country for 10 years. I proposed to the Democrats, let's remove that bar. Let's allow people to go back to their home country and return to the United States legally immediately instead of waiting 10 years. They said no because it wasn't a big comprehensive plan. The reality is that that law would have fixed the status for about 2.5 to 3 million people that are here illegally with a 2-page bill. I have the bill drafted. It's a 2-page bill that would have fixed the status for people, which is what my constituents want. My constituent says, you know what, tell them to get in the back of the line. This is exactly what they would do. They would go back to their home country, and within 2 to 6 months, they would be back in the United States legally. And the Democrats said, absolutely not, because it wasn't the big comprehensive bill. If you look at President Obama's history, he has stood in the way of immigration reform every single time. When he was in the Senate, he worked against the Bush administration, even after promising them that he was going to work with them. Then as a candidate, he promised that immigration was going to be his #1 issue. And instead, he decided to make Obamacare his #1 issue. And now that Republicans are in control, he says that Washington doesn't work, and that's why he has to do this executive amnesty, because he knew that people like Ron Johnson and myself were actually working towards a solution that was going to pass a Republican Congress. But he only looks at this through the prism of politics, and that's why, once again, I make sure that Republicans understand we shouldn't look at this through the prism of politics. This should be through the prism of policy. If we fix the policy, the American people will be 100% behind us.
We should also look at the prism of what's possible.
Yes.
So, when we talk about step-by-step approach, I think a lot of people think about 3 or 4 steps. I think we're talking dozens, particularly with President Obama in the office. So, certainly from my standpoint, the way I'm trying to approach it, for example, working with my ranking member, rather than figure out the things that divide us, that are divisive, what can we agree on? So first thing we did is we issued a mission statement to enhance the economic and national security of America. And holding these hearings, it's all about laying out the reality and trying to find the areas of agreement. So just step by step, like Raul was talking about, his 2-page bill, we reported out a bill, it was a McCain-Flake bill, just allowing federal agents to actually get on federal land to secure the border. What a concept. Now, it was too big a stretch. We couldn't get, for example, Democrat senators on the northern border to agree to let Customs and Border Patrol agents on federal land on their borders. Okay, fine. I'll take just a bill that will allow federal agents on Arizona borders. We'll use that as a test case. I come from manufacturing. I don't demand perfection. It's all about continuous improvement. I'll take the step by step by step continuous improvements as long as we're on the same path. So I really think it's probably dozens of little bills that, again, when I talked to Secretary Johnson and he's saying, we want a comprehensive approach, but at the same time he's saying that we won't have situational awareness during his term. So, okay, well, there's a reality. Why won't you work with us on at least beginning to improve the security on the border, start eliminating some of those incentives? Let's look at the 1 or 2 or 3-page bills, some fixes. They'll actually, when all totaled up, can make a pretty significant difference.
And let's be clear, when they say we want a comprehensive approach, what they mean is we want amnesty now and a guest worker program later and border security later. They want promises of border security and promises of guest worker. Well, guess what? We did that in 1986 and it didn't work.
And isn't this the problem with the way Congress always handles big questions?
Yes.
Is they have a left-right coalition of members brought together, and the problem on immigration is you get to this question of guest workers, right? Which everybody can agree that is a proper way to look at this issue, but it gets bollocksed up by the fact that there are a lot of constituencies on the left with Democrats that don't want a big, vigorous guest worker.
And here's an even bigger problem in Congress is people are happy to pass the fill-in-the-blank in name-only bill. Patient protection, affordable care. I mean, who's against protecting patients and affordable care? The problem is it just didn't do it. And we passed immigration and border security bills in the past, and they've failed. So you have to look at the reality situation. When we had the Bracero program back in the 60s, which was killed by Ted Kennedy, the unions, we didn't have much of an immigration problem. We had circularity. You start securing the borders, it has unintended consequences. Listen, it is a rational economic choice. If you're in Central America or Mexico where the wage differential is 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 or 7 times what you can make in America, people would come up here, work 2 months in the fields, and go home. They have a year's worth of salary. It is a system that worked. So we've got to look at the reality situation, and we've got to just prevent ourselves from just passing a bill. It's a problem. We've got to do it. That doesn't solve the problem. We've done enough of that.
And now without, for my conservative friends, without the rational guest worker program, what's happening is that not only do they come, but they bring their families.
Right.
Because it's so much harder to go back and forth. So it's much easier, much more rational for them to bring their entire families. So then their families are in our school system, in our hospitals. It's costing us billions and billions of dollars. If we had just a rational guest worker program, people would go back and forth, and they would be able to keep their families in their home countries, and they wouldn't be in the United States.
Another root cause, if you really want to look at the root cause of our border that is not secure, it's our insatiable demand for drugs. Again, look at that, 5 to 10% interdiction rate. And because we've had that insatiable demand for decades, that has allowed the rise of the drug cartels, which are now combining with transnational criminal organizations, which are now there's a nexus now between them and Islamic terror groups. I mean, this is a real problem, but again, the drug cartels have destroyed the public safety institutions of governments in Central America. The corruption, I mean, we see it. I mean, the beheadings, the barbarity that's occurring, a lot of that can be placed squarely on America's insatiable demand for drugs. So this is such an enormous problem, so complex. And let's face it, by passing, and I did not vote for the comprehensive bill in the Senate because it wouldn't work. It would have been another one of these, comprehensive immigration reform bills that would have failed just as miserably as the 1986 bill.
So do you agree with the concept that having a conversation with Republicans and conservatives about what we agree on is the necessary first step as we look at these next steps and rifle shots that need to be taken?
Well, the first step is laying out that reality, bit by bit, step by step, and again, finding agreement with Democrats. I mean, bringing out the things that are so common sense, winning the political argument on it. And if you do it in a very focused way, I mean, again, who could literally be opposed to 2 Republican senators in Arizona where the state actually wants Customs and Border Patrol agents to be able to patrol on federal lands? It'll be far friendlier to the environment than allowing illegal immigrants to use those corridors and scouring the land. Let's do that. Who could oppose that and take those step-by-step approaches where we can actually find agreement, win those political arguments?
I still think you need Democrats, because it doesn't matter how much.
Eventually, you have to.
Well,
it's
that's
the way to pass any of these bills.
You get Democrats behind the argument.
Because what's going to happen is that I can get about 150 to 170 Republicans to vote for most of these bills, because they're conservative immigration reform. They're modernizing the immigration system. But you're not going to get every Republican. So what the Democrats do is they vote in lockstep, and they say we're against reforming the 3 and 10-year bars. We're against reforming just the guest worker program for high tech. We passed a high tech bill 3 years ago out of the House that fixed the entire high tech industry, fixed all the problems for the high tech industry. And the Democrats said, we're not voting for that because if we take the high tech community out of the coalition of people going for comprehensive reform, we're going to lose the issue. Again, they want a political issue, and I just want a solution. I want a policy solution that fixes all the problems that we have. The other thing, I also think when we do it in a step-by-step approach, America understands better that we can fix this problem and the end of the world is not here. When you talk about immigration, you go to a town hall meeting and people go crazy about immigration, and they should, because our immigration system is just not working. We have so many people that are here illegally. If you start fixing these problems on a step-by-step approach, all of a sudden I can go to my town hall meeting and say, look, we fixed the 3 and 10-year bar, and it wasn't the end of the world. We fixed the high-tech immigration system, and it wasn't the end of the world. And that gives you the strength and the credibility to then fix these problems further and further and further.
Well, before I have to go, let me make a point, tying on to what Raul's talking about here. In order to pass the step-by-step approach, we need to have a strategic vision about what are the priorities of those steps that, again, we can win the political argument argument on. That's how you get Democrats to sign on to these things. So we need to lay out all the different components. And again, I think there are dozens. And let's start at the low, let's take a look at the low-hanging fruit, the things that, even though they may be opposed to it because they want comprehensive, when you lay it out, and if we make, in a very strategic way, we working together in the House and Senate saying, no, we're going to really concentrate on this bill right here. It's not the full solution. It's actually a pretty small part of the solution, but it's key, and this is something we can win the political argument on, get Democrats to embrace, and get it passed. We've got to take off our legislative blinders, this kind of inside the Beltway bubble, and realize we've got to sell our ideas to the American public to create the political pressure to get Democrats to sign on and President Obama to sign on.
Well, let me ask you a final question on this, because I know you guys have to get back to your work in Congress. When I look at this, we don't want to look at this issue in terms of just electoral politics, but there's a political reality to selling something. Right. And there are voices that come up, voices that are like in this room to advocate for one position or another on immigration. When it comes to Republicans and Republican office holders, what's the voice that's missing? Who would you like to see speaking up more? We read a lot of corporate voices that are speaking up. Is that productive? Is that counterproductive? Who else would you like to see stand up and be heard on this issue?
Well, I will tell you it'll be critical that our presidential candidates do so, because they will be our voice. All their campaigns will be covered. And so what I'm hoping they will do is take a look at the work that Raul's doing. Take a look at what we're doing and understand that this, don't be proposing. I wish we could ban.
One of those candidates is from Wisconsin.
Precisely. So I'll be talking to him. I have spoken with him. But the fact of the matter is, we should ban comprehensive and start looking at those. And so if they start, again, understanding that the vast majority of people in this country right now illegally, and they, got to follow laws, but they are working hard. They are working hard. And we got to realize that we're a nation of immigrants. And that's what our forefathers did. They came to this country seeking opportunity. That's what the vast majority of illegal immigrants in this country did as well. It was a rational economic choice. Let's speak about that honestly. Let's understand that that is what makes this country great, is an immigrant population, but done in a legal process. Let's make sure we make it a legal process.
I don't know that there's any one voice. I think the American people are going to speak when we show them a vision, like Ron was talking about. If we have a plan, and my office is working on that right now. I just finally decided, instead of working with all these different groups, in the next 6 months, I'm going to lay out a vision for the Republican Party, what things we need to do, the 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 12 bills that we need to do, and show why they're important and how they're going to fix the immigration problem. And hopefully one or two or maybe all of the candidates will get behind something like that. When we have a vision, the people follow that vision, and I think it's important for us as Republicans to lead with that vision.
It's called leadership. What a concept.
Yeah. That's great. Lead.
Yes.
Lead, and people will follow. Well, we really appreciate your time here today. We want to let you get back to your schedules. Thanks for standing up and talking about a really important issue for our country and for our economy. And I like what you said, Senator. It's a question of who we are as America.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Remember your mic is hot.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Senator Johnson, and thank you, Congressman Labrador. I also want to thank our panelists, Niger Ennis, Lila Rose, Alex Narasta, Dr. Matt Spalding, Hillsdale College, and all the attendees. In closing, I'd just like to say that it's one thing to point out the problems with immigration reform and our broken immigration system, and we did quite a bit of that today. But it's a totally another thing to propose original and thoughtful solutions, which I hope you would all agree that we also did today. We hope that our plan encourages a more vibrant debate across the country and revives it, and that it eventually leads to quality immigration reform that establishes a more respectful notion of human dignity for both immigrants and American citizens. Before everyone leaves, on your way out, we have these nifty little 5-point immigration plans. It goes over Alfonso's 5-point plan, it expands out, and it's got all 5 steps. So make sure that you grab one of these before you leave. And again, thank you all for coming, and we hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. Thank you.